In the grand palaces of 1,000 worlds, beneath crystal domes that filtered the light of alien suns, the most powerful beings in the galaxy had tried and failed. Telepathic healers who could mend broken minds with a touch. Probability manipulators who could bend reality itself to their will. Ancient entities that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. All had come before the twin heirs of the Zephyrian Empire, offering gifts beyond imagination, performing miracles that defied the laws of physics. None had succeeded in doing the one thing their mother, Empress Lyralii, desired most. No one had made her children smile. For 7 years, Prince Kale and Princess Zura had lived in a state that baffled the greatest minds of the Empire. Not catatonic, not ill, not even truly sad. They simply existed in a void where joy could not take root. They spoke when necessary, learned what was required, and performed their royal duties with mechanical precision. But their eyes remained empty, their faces masks of polite indifference. The Empire's scientists called it emotional void syndrome. The mystics whispered of cursed bloodlines. The politicians feared what would happen when two emotionally dead beings inherited control of the most powerful military force in known space. But in a small maintenance bay on the 47th sublevel of the Imperial Palace, a human janitor named Marcus Chun was about to do something that would change the course of galactic history. He was going to tell them a joke about a mop. Marcus Chun had been invisible for 3 years, which suited him perfectly fine. In a palace filled with beings who could read thoughts, manipulate time, and bend matter to their will, being a baseline human with nothing more than a strong work ethic and an unshakable sense of humor was like being a shadow among gods. The alien nobles and their retinues swept past him in the corridors without a glance, their minds occupied with matters of cosmic importance while he pushed his cart of cleaning supplies through their gilded halls. The Zephyrian Empire sprawled across 12 sectors of the galaxy, encompassing over 3,000 inhabited worlds and countless species. At its heart sat the Imperial Palace on Zephyr Prime, a magnificent structure that rose 47 levels above ground and burrowed another 50 below. Marcus worked the sublevels, maintaining the vast network of atmospheric processors, gravity generators, and waste management systems that kept the palace functioning. It was honest work, necessary work, and it let him send enough credits home to Earth to keep his aging parents comfortable in their retirement. He whistled while he worked, an ancient human habit that seemed to amuse the few maintenance droids who shared his shifts. Today it was an old song his grandmother had taught him, something about sunshine and yellow submarines that made no sense in the context of deep space, but somehow felt right echoing through the sterile corridors of level -23. The service elevator hummed as it carried him up to -15, where a reported malfunction in the atmospheric recycling system needed attention. Marcus consulted his tablet, noting the location of the problem unit. The readout showed elevated humidity levels in corridor section Delta 7, which usually meant a coolant leak in one of the environmental processors. As the elevator doors opened, Marcus immediately noticed something different about this level. The usual hum of machinery was muted, replaced by an odd quality to the air that made his skin prickle. The lighting was different too, softer, and more natural than the stark efficiency lighting used in most of the sublevels. He consulted his tablet again, frowning. This section wasn't marked as a standard maintenance area. He pushed his cart down the corridor, following the humidity readings on his scanner. The walls here were different from the utilitarian metal and plastic of the lower levels. These were covered in a smooth, pearl-like substance that seemed to shift color as he moved past. Expensive. This was clearly a part of the palace that had been designed for someone important. The humidity readings led him to a junction where 3 corridors met. According to his scanner, the leak was coming from behind a wall panel marked with symbols he couldn't read. He set down his toolkit and began examining the panel, looking for the release mechanism that would let him access the environmental systems behind it. A soft sound made him pause. Footsteps, light and measured, approaching from the corridor to his left. Marcus straightened up, suddenly aware that he might not belong here. His clearance was supposed to give him access to any maintenance area in the palace, but the elegant decor of this level suggested it might be more than just a maintenance area. Two figures emerged from the corridor, and Marcus felt his breath catch. Even without formal introduction, he knew immediately who they were. Prince Kael and Princess Zura, the twin heirs to the Zephyrian throne. He had seen their images on news feeds and official announcements, but seeing them in person was different. They moved with the fluid grace that marked their species, their skin bearing the faint luminescent patterns that indicated royal bloodline. Kael appeared to be about 12 years old in human terms, while Zora looked perhaps 10, though Marcus knew that Zephyrian aging patterns didn't match human development exactly. What struck him most, however, was their faces. He had expected the alert curiosity of children, the natural questions that should come when finding a stranger in their private domain. Instead, their expressions were eerily blank. They regarded him with the polite attention they might give to a piece of furniture that had been placed in an unexpected location. "Your Highnesses," Marcus said, offering what he hoped was an appropriate bow. His orientation materials had covered basic etiquette for unexpected encounters with royalty, though they had assured him such meetings were extremely unlikely for someone in his position. "You are performing maintenance," Prince Kael observed. His voice was clear and precise, carrying none of the warmth Marcus would have expected from a child. "Yes, Your Highness. Environmental systems. There's a coolant leak affecting the atmosphere processors on this level." Marcus gestured toward his scanner, which was still beeping softly to indicate the humidity problem. Princess Zara stepped closer, studying his equipment with the same detached interest her brother had shown. "You are human." "That's right, Your Highness. We have not encountered a human before," she said. "Our tutors tell us that humans are considered primitive by most galactic standards, yet they have proven surprisingly adaptable to circumstances that challenge more advanced species." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond to that. It wasn't exactly an insult, but it wasn't a compliment either. "We do our best to be useful, Your Highness." The twins exchanged a look that seemed to carry meaning he couldn't interpret. Then Kael spoke again. "You may continue your work. We will observe." Under other circumstances, Marcus might have been nervous about performing his duties under royal scrutiny. But there was something about the children's manner that concerned him more than their status. They positioned themselves against the far wall and watched him with the same intensity they might give to a scientific demonstration. There was no childlike curiosity in their gaze, no questions about how his tools worked or what he was doing. They simply observed, as if collecting data for some internal report. Marcus activated the wall panel's release mechanism and carefully removed the covering to expose the environmental systems behind it. The problem was immediately apparent. A stress fracture in one of the coolant lines had allowed the fluid to leak into the surrounding space, creating the humidity spike his scanner had detected. It was a straightforward repair that would take perhaps 20 minutes. As he worked, Marcus found himself stealing glances at the two children. They hadn't moved from their position against the wall, hadn't spoken to each other or to him. They simply stood there, perfectly still, watching his every movement with those eerily empty eyes. The silence began to feel oppressive. Marcus had never been comfortable with quiet, and the children's unnatural stillness was starting to make his skin crawl. Without really thinking about it, he began to talk as he worked. "This kind of leak is pretty common in older systems," he said, carefully sealing the fracture with a polymer patch. "The coolant lines expand and contract with temperature changes, and over time the metal gets fatigue stress. Eventually something gives way." He glanced up at the twins, kind of like when you bend a paperclip back and forth until it breaks. Neither child responded, but they continued to watch. Marcus tried again. "I bet you don't have much experience with paperclips, though. Most advanced civilizations moved past physical document storage centuries ago." He activated his sealer and began bonding the patch to the coolant line. "Humans are kind of old-fashioned that way. We still like having physical things to hold on to." Still no response. Marcus finished the repair and began packing his tools back into their case. The silence was becoming genuinely uncomfortable now. These children were clearly intelligent, clearly capable of communication, but There was something fundamentally wrong with their behavior. They acted like extremely sophisticated androids running a social interaction protocol, not like living beings capable of genuine engagement. As he prepared to close up the wall panel, an idea occurred to him. It was probably inappropriate, definitely outside his job description, but the wrongness of the children's behavior was bothering him more than he wanted to admit. "You know what this reminds me of?" he said, gesturing toward the repaired coolant line. "There's an old human joke about a maintenance worker and a broken pipe." The twins showed no reaction, but they didn't move away either. Marcus decided to take that as permission to continue. "So there's this maintenance worker, and he gets called to fix a pipe that's leaking water all over an expensive carpet. He looks at the pipe, he looks at the carpet, and he realizes he doesn't have the right tools for the job. But he's got to stop the leak somehow, right? So he takes off his boot and jams it over the leaky spot. Marcus mimed the action, holding up his own boot as a visual aid. The leak stops, the carpet is saved, everyone's happy. The next day, his supervisor comes by to check on the repair and finds the boot still stuck on the pipe. "What's this?" the supervisor asks. And the maintenance worker says, "That's a socket wrench, sir." Marcus waited for some reaction, some sign that the children had processed the wordplay. Nothing. They continued to stare at him with those blank, polite faces. It's funny because a socket wrench is a real tool, but this guy used his boot instead, so he's calling his boot a socket wrench, even though Marcus trailed off, feeling foolish. I guess you'd have to know what a socket wrench is for it to make sense. He finished closing the wall panel and gathered his equipment. The humidity readings on his scanner showed normal levels now, indicating that the repair was successful. He should leave. He had other maintenance calls to attend to, and lingering in the royal quarters was probably against several palace regulations. But as he picked up his toolkit, Princess Zara spoke for the first time since identifying him as human. "Why'd you tell us that story?" Marcus paused, surprised by the question. Well, I thought you might find it amusing. Children usually like jokes." "We are not like other children," Prince Kale said. The statement was delivered without emotion, as a simple statement of fact. "No," Marcus agreed. "I can see that." He looked at the two of them, these strange, empty children who should have been the future of their civilization, and felt a deep sadness settle in his chest. Whatever was wrong with them, it was robbing them of something fundamental to childhood, something he couldn't even properly define, but recognized as missing. "Would you like to hear another joke?" he asked. The twins exchanged another of their silent communications. Then Zura nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. Marcus set his toolkit back down and thought for a moment. "Okay, this one's about a mop. A really old, worn-out mop that's been used to clean every kind of mess you can imagine. One day, the mop is sitting in the janitor's closet, feeling sorry for itself. 'I'm old and frayed,' it thinks. 'Nobody appreciates me. I spend my whole existence soaking up other people's problems.'" He picked up his mop from the cart and held it up as a prop. Then, a brand new sponge gets delivered to the closet. It's bright and clean and full of itself. The sponge looks at the mop and says, "Wow, you look terrible. When I'm your age, I'll never let myself get so worn down." And the mop says, "That's funny, kid. When you're my age, you'll have been replaced 300 times. This time, Marcus thought he saw something flicker across Princess Zara's face. Not a smile, not even close, but perhaps the faintest suggestion that some part of her had processed the joke differently than the first one. "Experience has value," she said quietly. "That's right," Marcus agreed. "Sometimes the old, beat-up stuff is the most useful." Prince Kale stepped away from the wall. "You speak to us as if we were ordinary children, aren't you?" The question seemed to surprise them both. They looked at each other again, and Marcus saw something pass between them that might have been confusion. "We are the heirs to the Zephyrian Empire," Kale said, as if reciting from a textbook. "We carry the genetic markers of our royal lineage. We have been trained in statecraft, military strategy, and diplomatic protocol since we could walk. We are not ordinary. But do you ever just play?" Marcus asked. The silence stretched between them, heavy with something Marcus couldn't identify. Finally, Zara spoke. "We do not understand the concept of play." The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. These children, these poor, empty children, had been so thoroughly prepared for their future roles that they had been stripped of their present. No wonder they couldn't smile. They had never learned how. "Would you like me to show you?" he asked gently. Before either child could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor. Multiple sets of feet, moving with military precision. Marcus quickly gathered his tools and stepped back from the twins, recognizing the sound of palace guards. 3 Zephyrian guards rounded the corner, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the soft lighting. Their leader, a tall female with a complex facial scarification that indicated high rank, stopped short when she saw the scene. "Your Highnesses," she said, offering a formal salute. "We were conducting a routine patrol when our sensors detected unauthorized presence in this sector. The human is performing maintenance duties," Prince Kale explained in his flat, emotionless voice. There was a malfunction in the environmental systems. The guard leader's eyes fixed on Marcus with obvious suspicion. "Maintenance requests for the royal quarters require special authorization. I see no such documentation in your identification profile." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He pulled out his tablet and showed the maintenance order, hoping the humidity alert would be sufficient justification for his presence. "I was responding to an atmospheric processor malfunction, ma'am. The automated system flagged elevated humidity levels in this sector." The guard examined his tablet with the thoroughness of someone looking for a reason to find fault. After a long moment, she handed it back to him. "The repair appears to have been completed satisfactorily. However, in the future, any maintenance work in royal residential areas must be coordinated through palace security." "Yes, ma'am. I understand. You will return to your assigned work areas immediately." "Of course, ma'am." Marcus began pushing his cart toward the elevator, acutely aware of the guard's watchful eyes. As he reached the corridor junction, he risked a glance back at the twins. They stood exactly where he had left them, watching his departure with the same blank attention they had shown throughout their encounter. But as the elevator doors began to close, Marcus could have sworn he saw Princess Zara raise her hand in what might have been a tiny wave. The elevator carried him down into the familiar depths of the palace maintenance levels. But Marcus found his thoughts remained in that strange, pearl-walled corridor with 2 children who had forgotten how to be children. The encounter had lasted less than an hour, but it had shown him something that would haunt him for days to come. Somewhere in the vast machinery of imperial power, in the careful orchestration of royal education and political preparation, the most important thing had been lost. 2 children who should have been laughing, playing, and discovering the joy of being alive had instead been turned into perfect little automatons, ready to inherit an empire, but incapable of understanding why such inheritance might matter. As Marcus returned to his regular duties, checking coolant levels and replacing air filters in the anonymous corridors of sublevel -23, he found himself thinking about mops and socket wrenches, about the value of worn-out things, and about 2 children who had never learned to play. He didn't know it yet, but his chance encounter with the royal twins had set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything the Zephyrian Empire believed about power, leadership, and the strange, primitive species called humanity. All because a janitor had decided to tell a joke to 2 children who had never learned how to laugh. Empress Lorelei of the Zephyrian Empire stood at the vast window of her private chambers, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape of Zephyr Prime 47 stories below. The capital city stretched to the horizon in all directions, a testament to the technological mastery and organizational power of her people. Crystalline spires reached toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of the system's twin suns in brilliant cascades of color. Transport tubes wove between the buildings like veins of liquid silver, carrying millions of citizens through their daily lives in perfect efficiency. From his height, the Empire looked flawless, strong, eternal. But Lorelei knew better than anyone that empires were not built from crystal and metal. They were built from the hearts and minds of those who led them, and her children's hearts had become mysteries she could not solve. Behind her, The daily reports lay scattered across her desk like fragments of a puzzle that refused to come together. Military assessments, economic projections, diplomatic briefings from a dozen sectors. The empire functioned with magnificent precision, but every decision ultimately flowed through the royal bloodline. When she was gone, that responsibility would fall to Kale and Zara. The thought filled her with a dread that no amount of political success could dispel. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry to her chambers. "Come," she called, not turning from the window. "Your Imperial Majesty." The voice belonged to Dr. Vex Kronos, the palace's chief medical officer, and one of the few beings in the Empire who could speak to her with complete honesty. His species, the temporal observers, lived lives that spanned millennia and had developed a perspective on existence that made them invaluable as advisors. "I have completed my latest evaluation of the royal children." Lyrelii closed her eyes. "Tell me you have good news, old friend." "I wish I could." Dr. Kronos moved to stand beside her at the window, his ancient form casting an elongated shadow across the floor. Physically, they are perfect specimens. Their neural development is accelerated beyond normal parameters for their age group. Intellectually, they are performing at levels that exceed our most optimistic projections. But emotionally, no change. If anything, the void has become more pronounced. They have learned to mimic appropriate social responses with increasing sophistication, but there is no genuine emotional engagement beneath the performance. Lyrelii, finally, turned from a window, and Dr. Kronos saw the exhaustion that she kept hidden from the rest of the court. She was still young by Zephyrian standards, barely into her 3rd century of life, but the weight of ruling an empire while watching her children fade into emotional emptiness had aged her beyond her years. "How many specialists have we consulted now?" she asked. 43 from across 12 different species. We have explored every known psychological, neurological, and metaphysical explanation for their condition. The telepathic healers from Mindera Prime found no barriers or traumas in their mental landscape. The probability shapers from the Quantum Collective detected no dimensional anomalies affecting their timeline. The ancient wisdom keepers of the Eternal Archive have no record of similar cases in their vast databases. Dr. Kronos paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your Majesty, I must ask again. Are you certain you wish to continue these consultations?" Each failed attempt seems to distance the children further from any possibility of recovery. "What choice do I have?" Lyrelii's voice carried a desperation she rarely allowed herself to express. "They're my heirs, Vex. When I am gone, they will rule over 3,000 worlds and countless billions of lives. How can I hand them that responsibility when they cannot even understand why a sunset might be beautiful or why a child's laughter should bring joy?" "Perhaps," Dr. Kronos suggested gently, "the problem is that we are looking in the wrong places for the solution." Before Lyrelii could respond, another chime indicated an urgent communication. She activated her personal console, and the image of Captain Thyra Ironscale, head of palace security, appeared in the air before them. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but I felt you should be informed of an incident involving the royal children." Lyrelii's blood chilled. In her mind, incident could mean anything from an assassination attempt to another emotional breakdown. "What happened?" "Nothing dangerous, Your Majesty. The children encountered a human maintenance worker in the residential sectors. The individual was performing authorized duties, but the interaction lasted approximately 47 minutes. Given the children's condition and their lack of previous contact with baseline humans, I thought you should be aware." "A human?" Dr. Kronos raised one of his elongated eyebrows. "How curious. What was the nature of this interaction?" Captain Ironscale consulted her report. According to the children, the human was repairing an environmental malfunction. He spoke to them while working and told them what they described as stories with unexpected conclusions. Lyrelii felt something shift in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. "Stories. Jokes, Your Majesty." The human told them jokes. The silence in the chamber stretched for long moments. Finally, Dr. Kronos spoke. What was the children's response? Princess Zura indicated that she found one of the stories interesting and asked the human to explain his behavior. Prince Kale described the human as different from other adults they had encountered. Neither child expressed any negative reaction to the interaction. Lyralii exchanged glances with Dr. Kronos. In 7 years of consultations with the galaxy's greatest minds, no one had ever managed to elicit even mild interest from her children. The fact that a simple maintenance worker had accomplished something that telepathic healers and probability manipulators had failed to do was astounding. I want to speak with this human, she said. Your Majesty, Captain Ironscale said carefully, he is merely a janitor. His security clearance is minimal, and his background check shows nothing exceptional. He is, by all accounts, an ordinary human performing basic maintenance duties. Captain, my children have been examined by beings who can reshape reality with their thoughts. None of them managed to spark even a flicker of curiosity in my heirs. If an ordinary human janitor succeeded where they failed, then perhaps ordinary is exactly what we need. Dr. Kronos nodded slowly. There is wisdom in that observation, Your Majesty. We have been approaching this problem with increasingly exotic solutions, while perhaps overlooking simpler possibilities. Bring him to me, Lyralii commanded, quietly and with appropriate security protocols, but I want to speak with this human who made my children curious. Captain Ironscale bowed. It will be done, Your Majesty. The communication ended, leaving Lyralii alone with Dr. Kronos and a fragile hope she was afraid to examine too closely. She returned to the window, watching the flow of traffic through the transport tubes far below. Vex, she said quietly, do you remember when my children were born? Of course, Your Majesty. The entire empire celebrated for a full cycle. They were perfect, beautiful, healthy, alert. Zara laughed at the light patterns on the nursery ceiling. Kale would grip my finger with such strength, as if he was determined to hold on to everything the universe had to offer. Her voice grew distant with memory. For 3 years, they were everything I could have hoped for. Bright, curious, affectionate. They played together, explored everything they could reach, asked endless questions about how things worked. I remember, Dr. Kronos said gently. Then it began to fade, so gradually that I almost didn't notice at first. The laughter became less frequent. The questions stopped. They began to respond to situations instead of engaging with them. By their 5th birthday, it was as if someone had simply turned off the lights inside them. No trauma, no illness, no identifiable cause. Nothing. They simply stopped being children and became what they are now. Perfect little machines designed to inherit an empire, but incapable of understanding why anyone would want to inherit anything. Dr. Kronos moved closer to the window, his ancient eyes reflecting the light of the twin suns. Your Majesty, may I share an observation from my many years of existence? Always. In my travels across time and space, I have noticed that some of the most profound truths are discovered by those who approach problems from positions of ignorance rather than expertise. The greatest breakthroughs often come from individuals who are unaware that what they are attempting is supposed to be impossible. You think this human might see something that all our experts missed? I think this human has already seen something they missed. He made contact with your children in a way that resonated with whatever spark still exists inside them. Whether he understands the significance of that contact is irrelevant. What matters is that the connection was made. Lyralii nodded, though her expression remained troubled. What if we're grasping at shadows, Vex? What if this was just a momentary anomaly that means nothing? Then we will have learned something about the nature of that anomaly. But, Your Majesty, consider this. Every expert we have consulted approach your children as problems to be solved. This human appears to have approached them simply as children to be spoken with. Perhaps the difference in methodology is more important than the difference in capability. The wisdom in his words settled into Lyralii's mind like pieces of a puzzle finding their proper places. The Empire's greatest minds had all tried to fix her children, to cure them, to restore them to some predetermined state of emotional health. None had simply tried to connect with them as they were. How long until Captain Ironscale brings the human here? Given standard security protocols, perhaps 2 hours. Enough time for a thorough background check and briefing on appropriate court behavior. No briefing, Lyralii said suddenly. If this human's value lies in his natural approach to my children, I don't want that approach altered by coaching on royal etiquette. Your Majesty, that is highly irregular. Palace protocol requires. Palace protocol has not served my children well, Vex. Perhaps it's time to try something irregular. Dr. Kronos inclined his head in acknowledgement. As you wish, though I suggest we at least inform him of basic forms of address to avoid any unfortunate misunderstandings. Agreed. But nothing more. As if summoned by their conversation, another soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. This time, the communication came from the royal tutor's wing of the palace. Lyralii accepted the connection, and the image of Professor Krell Mindweaver, her children's primary educator, appeared before them. Your Imperial Majesty, I must report an unusual development in today's lessons. Lyralii's pulse quickened. What kind of development? The children completed their assignments with their usual efficiency, but afterward, Prince Kale asked me an unexpected question. He wanted to know why humans tell stories that are intended to provoke emotional responses in others. What did you tell him? I explained that many species use narrative as a form of social bonding and emotional regulation. But then Princess Zara asked why some stories are considered funny while others are not, and I realized that their questions were not academic in nature. They were trying to understand something they had experienced personally. Dr. Kronos leaned forward. Did they mention their encounter with a human maintenance worker? Not directly, but when I pressed them about the source of their curiosity, Princess Zara said they had met someone who used words differently than other adults. She seemed puzzled by the memory, as if she was trying to solve a problem that she couldn't quite define. Lyralii felt that dangerous hope growing stronger in her chest. Her children had not shown curiosity about anything in 4 years. The fact that a chance encounter with a human janitor had sparked enough interest to carry over into their formal education was unprecedented. Professor, I want you to adjust today's curriculum. Include a section on human cultural practices, particularly their use of humor and narrative, but present it as academic material. Don't let them know we're aware of their personal interest in the subject. Of course, Your Majesty. Though if I may ask, what significance do you see in this development? I'm not sure yet, but it's the first spontaneous curiosity they've shown since they were 3 years old. I want to nurture it carefully. The communication ended, leaving Lyralii and Dr. Kronos alone with their thoughts, and the growing possibility that salvation for her children might come from the most unexpected source imaginable. Vex, she said finally, what do you know about human psychology? About their approach to emotional development? Very little, I'm afraid. Humans are a relatively young species, and their psychological patterns are still evolving. They lack the sophisticated mental abilities of most advanced species, but they have demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience. Adaptability, Lyralii mused. Perhaps that's the key. We've been trying to solve my children's condition using the advanced techniques of species who have evolved beyond the need for basic emotional expression. But humans are still fundamentally emotional beings. They haven't developed past the need for joy, wonder, and play. You think this human janitor might understand something about childhood that we have forgotten? I think he might remember something about childhood that we never knew in the first place. The twin sons of Zephyr Prime were beginning their descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the palace below, a human maintenance worker was going about his daily duties, unaware that he had become the center of the Empress's desperate hopes. And in their private quarters, 2 royal children were asking questions for the first time in years, trying to understand why a stranger's words had made them feel something that their tutors insisted was called curiosity. The empire that had been built on the foundation of advanced technology and sophisticated mental abilities was about to discover that some of the most important human achievements couldn't be measured by psychic power or technological mastery. Sometimes, the most profound breakthrough came from knowing how to make someone smile. Marcus Chun had been working in maintenance long enough to recognize the sound of trouble approaching. When Captain Ironscale and two of her elite guards appeared at his workstation in sub-level -31, their ceremonial armor gleaming under the harsh utility lighting, he knew his encounter with the royal children had consequences he hadn't anticipated. "Marcus Chun," Captain Ironscale said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "You will accompany us." Marcus set down the atmospheric processor diagnostic he'd been running and wiped his hands on his work coveralls. "Am I in trouble, Captain?" "That remains to be determined. Her Imperial Majesty wishes to speak with you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Empress, the ruler of 3,000 worlds and countless billions of lives, wanted to speak with him. A maintenance worker from Earth whose greatest achievement was keeping the palace's environmental systems running smoothly. "Did I do something wrong when I met the children?" he asked, following the guards toward the service elevator. "I was just doing my job, fixing a coolant leak. I didn't mean to." "You will have the opportunity to explain your actions to Her Majesty directly," Captain Ironscale interrupted. "Until then, you will remain silent." The elevator ride to the upper levels seemed to take forever. Marcus had never been above ground level in the palace, and as the indicator showed them ascending through floors he'd only seen on maintenance schematics, he felt increasingly out of place. The guards flanked him in perfect formation, their expressions revealing nothing about what awaited him. When the elevator finally stopped at level 37, the doors opened to reveal a world Marcus had never imagined. The utilitarian metal and plastic of the maintenance levels gave way to corridors lined with living crystal that pulsed with soft, natural light. The air itself felt different here, charged with an energy that made his skin tingle. Artwork from across the galaxy adorned the walls, and the ceiling was transparent, offering a view of Zephyr Prime's twin suns that took his breath away. They walked through corridors wide enough to accommodate small vehicles, past chambers whose purposes Marcus could only guess at. Other beings moved through the halls with the fluid grace of those born to power, their conversations conducted in languages that shifted between audible sound and patterns of light that his human eyes couldn't fully process. "Stay close," Captain Ironscale instructed as they approached a set of doors that seemed to be carved from a single massive pearl. "When you address Her Majesty, you will use the title Your Imperial Majesty for the first address, and Your Majesty thereafter. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will answer all questions truthfully and completely. Do you understand?" "Yes, Captain." The doors opened silently at their approach, revealing a chamber that redefined Marcus's understanding of what a room could be. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into a soft glow that might have been artificial light or captured starshine. The walls curved gently, their surface the same pearl-like material as the doors, but shot through with veins of gold that pulsed with a rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat. At the far end of the chamber, on a platform that seemed to float unsupported in the air, sat the Empress of the Zephyrian Empire. Lyralii was smaller than Marcus had expected, though her presence filled the vast space with an authority that was almost tangible. Her skin bore the luminescent patterns that marked royal bloodline, but where her children's markings were dim and lifeless, hers pulsed with vibrant energy. She was dressed in robes that seemed to be woven from captured light, and her eyes held an intelligence so profound that Marcus felt momentarily dizzy looking into them. Beside her stood a figure Marcus didn't recognize, tall and impossibly thin, with features that suggested great age. This being's eyes were different from any Marcus had seen, containing depths that seemed to stretch backward through time itself. "Approach," the Empress commanded, her voice carrying easily across the vast chamber despite its conversational tone. Marcus walked forward, his work boots echoing on the crystalline floor. When he reached what seemed like an appropriate distance, he attempted the bow Captain Ironscale had drilled into him during their brief etiquette session. Your Imperial Majesty, he said, hoping his voice didn't betray his nervousness. Rise, she said. You are Marcus Chun, of the planet Earth. Yes, Your Majesty. You work in environmental maintenance for the palace. Yes, Your Majesty. And yesterday, while performing your duties, you encounter my children. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the chamber's perfect temperature control. Yes, Your Majesty. I was repairing a coolant leak in the atmospheric processors on level -15. They came upon me while I was working. Tell me about this encounter. Marcus glanced at the strange, ancient being standing beside the throne, then back at the Empress. I'm not sure what you want to know, Your Majesty. They were very polite. They asked about my work, and I explained what I was doing. We talked for a little while, and then the guards arrived to escort me back to my assigned areas. What did you talk about? The question carried a weight that Marcus couldn't quite understand. There was something in the Empress's voice, a carefully controlled desperation that suggested this conversation was about more than just a security breach. I told them about the repair work, Your Majesty, about stress fractures in coolant lines, and how metal fatigue causes system failures. And I told them a couple of jokes. Jokes. The word seemed to hang in the air. Why did you tell my children jokes? Marcus struggled to find an explanation that wouldn't sound foolish when spoken aloud to the ruler of an interstellar empire. They seemed sad, Your Majesty. Not crying or anything like that, but empty. I've never seen children who were so quiet, and still, it bothered me. I thought maybe a joke would help. Did it help? I'm not sure, Your Majesty. They listened to the jokes, and Princess Zara asked me to explain one of them. Prince Kale said I spoke to them differently than other adults, but they didn't laugh or smile or anything like that. The Empress exchanged a glance with the ancient being beside her. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more personal. Marcus Chun, I'm going to share something with you that is known to very few people outside my immediate circle. My children suffer from a condition that has baffled the greatest minds in the Empire. They have lost the ability to experience joy, wonder, curiosity, or any of the emotions that should define childhood. For 4 years, we have consulted specialists from every advanced species in known space, seeking a cure or treatment. All have failed. Marcus felt the weight of that revelation settle on his shoulders. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. That must be terrible for you. Yesterday, for the first time in 4 years, my children asked questions motivated by personal curiosity. They wanted to understand why you told them stories, and why those stories were meant to be funny. This morning, their tutors report that they're showing interest in learning about human cultural practices. The implications of her words slowly penetrated Marcus's consciousness. You think I helped them somehow. I think you accomplished something that beings capable of rewriting reality could not. You made a connection with them. Marcus looked around the magnificent chamber at the displays of wealth and power that surrounded him, and felt completely out of his depth. Your Majesty, I'm just a maintenance worker. I don't know anything about child psychology or alien medicine. I fix air recyclers and patch coolant leaks. Perhaps that's exactly why you succeeded where others failed. The ancient being beside the throne spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Mr. Chun, I am Dr. Kronos, Chief Medical Officer to the royal family. May I ask what prompted you to approach the royal children as you did? Marcus thought for a moment. They were just kids, sir. I mean, I know they're royalty and all that, but they were still just kids standing in a corridor watching me work. And they seemed so alone. I've got nephews back on Earth about their age, and I know what children are supposed to look like when they're happy and engaged. These kids look like they'd never played a game or heard a bedtime story in their lives. So you treated them as you would treat children from your own world? I treated them like children, period. I didn't think about their species or their royal status. I just saw 2 kids who looked like they needed someone to care about them for a few minutes. Dr. Kronos nodded slowly. And this approach of yours, treating royal heirs as ordinary children, this is normal human behavior? Well, yeah. I mean, on Earth, kids are kids regardless of who their parents are. Rich kids, poor kids, they all need the same basic things. Love, attention, someone to play with, and teach them about the world. The Empress leaned forward on her throne, her luminescent patterns pulsing with increased intensity. Mr. Chun, what you describe as normal human behavior appears to be something we have lost in our pursuit of preparing our children for their destined roles. Tell me, on your world, how do royal children learn to lead? Marcus almost laughed at the question before he caught himself. Your Majesty, Earth doesn't really have royalty anymore. Not the way you do, anyway. We have elected leaders, and their children are just regular kids who go to regular schools and play regular games. They don't inherit political power just because of who their parents are. But surely your leaders must prepare their offspring for positions of responsibility? Some do, I suppose. But mostly, kids are expected to be kids first. They play, they learn, they make friends, they get into trouble, they figure out who they are and what they want to become. The serious stuff comes later. Dr. Kronos and the Empress exchanged another meaningful look. Mr. Chun, the doctor said, would you be willing to spend time with the royal children? To treat them as you would any children from your world? The magnitude of what they were asking hit Marcus like a meteor. You want me to babysit the heirs to the Galactic Empire? We want you to help them remember how to be children, the Empress said. My son and daughter are brilliant, well-educated, and perfectly prepared to inherit the responsibilities of leadership. But they have forgotten how to laugh, how to play, how to find joy in simple things. If there is even a chance that your approach might help them recover what they have lost, then I am willing to set aside every protocol and convention that governs this palace. Marcus felt the weight of 3,000 worlds pressing down on his shoulders. Your Majesty, what if I make things worse? What if I say the wrong thing or teach them something inappropriate? I'm not trained for this kind of responsibility. Mr. Chun, she said gently, the greatest minds in the galaxy have tried to help my children using their most advanced techniques and sophisticated understanding. All have failed. Perhaps what my children need is not sophistication, but simplicity. Not advanced understanding, but basic human kindness. The chamber fell silent except for the soft pulsing of the wall's golden veins. Marcus thought about Prince Kale and Princess Zura, those empty, beautiful children who watch the world with the detached interest of scientists studying specimens. He thought about his nephews back on Earth, their messy rooms and loud laughter and endless questions about everything they encountered. What exactly would you want me to do? He asked finally. Spend time with them, the Empress replied. Talk to them. Play with them if you can. Show them how children are supposed to interact with the world. And if it doesn't work, if they don't respond to whatever I try to do, then we will have learned that even human approaches cannot reach them, and we will know that we have exhausted every possibility. Dr. Kronos stepped forward. Mr. Chun, I want to be completely honest with you about the stakes involved. Prince Kale and Princess Zara will someday rule the Zephyrian Empire. If they remain as emotionally void as they are now, they will make decisions affecting billions of lives based purely on logic and efficiency, without understanding or caring about the hopes, dreams, and happiness of their subjects. They could become perfect tyrants, ruling through pure rational thought untempered by empathy or compassion. The weight of that possibility settled into Marcus's chest like a stone. He imagined the galaxy ruled by beings who could not understand why joy mattered, why beauty had value, why the laughter of children was worth preserving. How long would I have? He asked. As long as it takes, the Empress replied, or until we determine that it isn't working, and I'd still do my maintenance work. Your official position would be as a cultural liaison and educational consultant. You would retain your security clearances and continue to live in the staff quarters, but your primary responsibility would be to the children. Marcus thought about his small apartment in the staff residential section, about the steady paycheck he sent home to Earth, about the simple life he'd built for himself maintaining the palace's environmental systems. All of that would change if he accepted this responsibility. Then he thought about Princess Zura raising her hand in what might have been a wave, and Prince Kale asking why he spoke to them differently than other adults. I'll try, he said quietly. I can't promise anything, Your Majesty, but I'll try to help them. The relief that crossed the Empress's face was so profound that it transformed her from an untouchable figure of absolute power into a mother desperate to save her children. "Thank you," she said, and there were tears in her voice. "Dr. Kronos will brief you on the children's schedules and any medical considerations you should be aware of. Captain Ironscale will adjust your security clearances and work assignments. And Mr. Chun, yes, Your Majesty, whatever happens, remember that my children are not broken machines that need to be fixed. They are lost children who need to find their way back to joy. If anyone can help them remember that path, it may be someone who has never forgotten what it means to be human." As Marcus left the throne chamber, escorted by Captain Ironscale toward briefings and security updates and all the bureaucratic machinery that would transform a janitor into a royal consultant, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to attempt something that would either save 2 children or fail in the most spectacular way imaginable. But somewhere in the depths of his human heart, in the place where hope lived alongside stubbornness and an inexplicable faith in the power of simple kindness, Marcus Chun began to plan how to teach 2 alien princes that the universe was full of things worth smiling about. He just hoped he remembered how to do it himself. The Royal Children's Study Chambers occupied an entire wing of Level 25, a space designed to accommodate the educational needs of future galactic rulers. When Marcus arrived for his first official session with Prince Kale and Princess Zura, he found himself in rooms that looked more like a research facility than anywhere children might learn and play. The main study hall stretched 50 meters in length, its walls lined with holographic displays showing real-time data from across the Empire. Economic reports scrolled past in streams of luminous text. Military deployment maps rotated in 3-dimensional glory, and diplomatic communications flickered between worlds and languages Marcus couldn't begin to identify. The furniture was perfectly proportioned for the children's current height, but constructed from the same austere materials used throughout the palace's formal areas. Prince Kale and Princess Zara sat at separate workstations, each focused on tablets displaying what appeared to be advanced mathematics. They glanced up when Marcus entered, offering the same polite, emotionless acknowledgement they might give to any adult whose presence required minimal attention. "Good morning, Your Highnesses," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice warm and casual despite the formal setting. "Good morning, Cultural Liaison Chun," Princess Zara replied, using the official title that had been assigned to his new position. Marcus winced. "You could just call me Marcus, if that's okay with you." The children exchanged one of their silent communications, then Prince Kale spoke. "Our tutors have instructed us that proper forms of address are important for maintaining appropriate social hierarchies." "That's probably true in most situations," Marcus agreed. "But when we're just talking together, maybe we could be a little less formal." He approached their workstations and glanced at the material they were studying. The mathematical equations on their tablets dealt with hyperspace navigation and quantum field manipulation, concepts that would challenge graduate students at Earth's most advanced universities. "What are you working on?" he asked. "Advanced spatial mechanics," Zara replied. "We are calculating the energy requirements for establishing stable wormhole corridors between distant star systems." "That sounds complicated." "It is a basic skill required for Imperial logistics," Kale said. "When we assume our thrones, we will need to understand the mathematical foundations of our transportation networks." Marcus stared at them for a moment, trying to process what he was hearing. These children, who appeared to be no older than 12 and 10 in human terms, were studying concepts that represented the cutting edge of galactic technology. No wonder they had lost touch with childhood wonder. They had been buried under the weight of cosmic responsibility since they could hold a stylus. "Do you ever do anything that's not related to ruling the Empire?" he asked gently. The question seemed to confuse them. Zara tilted her head in a gesture that reminded Marcus of a bird trying to understand an unfamiliar sound. "Everything we do is related to ruling the Empire," she said. "That is our purpose. But what about just having fun? Playing games? Exploring things because they're interesting, not because they're useful?" We do not understand the concept of fun, Kale said, repeating the admission he had made during their first encounter. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down next to their workstations, ignoring the formal distance that protocol probably demanded. Would you like me to show you? Show us what? What fun is? What it's like to do something just because it makes you happy, not because it serves a practical purpose. The children looked at each other, then back at him. Our schedule allows for 1 hour of cultural education with you, Zara said. After that, we must return to our studies in xenobiology and diplomatic protocol. Okay, Marcus said. 1 hour to start with. That's enough time to learn about fun. He stood up and looked around the study hall, taking in the vast space with its walls of streaming data and formal furniture. First thing we need to do is get out of here. You can't learn about fun in a room designed for work. Where would we go? Kale asked. Marcus thought for a moment. He had been given access to most areas of the palace as part of his new role, but he wasn't sure which spaces might be appropriate for what he had in mind. Then, he remembered something from his orientation materials. Is there a garden somewhere in the palace? Somewhere with plants and open space. There is the Ecological Preservation Dome on level 30, Zara said. It contains representative flora from across the Empire for research purposes. Perfect. Let's go there. The children gathered their tablets and prepared to accompany him, moving with the same mechanical precision they brought to everything else. As they walked toward the elevators, Marcus tried to think of how to begin. Every parenting guide he'd ever heard about emphasized the importance of age-appropriate activities, but what was age-appropriate for children who had been studying hyperspace physics since they could talk? The Ecological Preservation Dome turned out to be exactly what Marcus needed. It was a vast space enclosed by a transparent ceiling that offered a view of the sky above Zephyr Prime, filled with plants and trees from dozens of different worlds. Streams of water wound through carefully maintained landscapes, and the air was rich with the sense of growing things. This is better, Marcus said, breathing deeply. Much better. The children stood beside him, surveying the dome with the same analytical attention they gave to everything else. This facility maintains over 400 species of plant life, Kale observed. The environmental controls replicate the specific atmospheric and soil conditions required for each ecosystem. It's like having a piece of every world in the Empire, Zara added. Very efficient for botanical research. Marcus looked at them, these brilliant children who could calculate wormhole energies but couldn't see the simple beauty of garden, and felt his heart break a little. Forget about research for a minute, he said. Just look around and tell me what you see. We see a controlled environment designed to... No, Marcus interrupted gently. Don't think about what it's designed for. Just look at it. What do you notice? The children stood silently for a long moment, clearly struggling with the concept of observing without analyzing. Finally, Zara spoke hesitantly. The colors are very bright. Yes, Marcus said, probably with more enthusiasm than the observation warranted. What else? The water makes sounds as it moves over the stones, Kale added, sounding puzzled by his own observation. That's right. And how do those sounds make you feel? Feel? Zara's confusion was evident. We do not understand the question. Marcus realized he was approaching this wrong. These children had been so thoroughly trained out of emotional awareness that asking them about feelings was like asking them to explain a sense they'd never possessed. Okay, let's try something different, he said. See that stream over there? Let's go sit next to it. He led them to a spot where the artificial stream gurgled over a collection of smooth stones, creating a gentle water feature that was probably intended to demonstrate erosion patterns or aquatic ecosystem dynamics. Marcus sat down on the soft ground beside the water, patting the spaces next to him to indicate that the children should join him. They sat with the careful posture they brought to everything back straight, hands folded in their laps, ready to receive instruction. Now, Marcus said, I want you to take off your shoes and put your feet in the water. The request clearly violated several protocols. The children looked at each other uncertainly. Is this part of human cultural education? Kale asked. It's part of being a kid, Marcus said, pulling off his own boots and rolling up his trouser legs. Sometimes you do things that don't make sense just because they're interesting. He stuck his feet into the stream, sighing with pleasure as the cool water flowed around his toes. Try it. After another exchange of uncertain glances, the children carefully removed their formal shoes and placed their feet in the water. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Zara jerked her foot back as if she'd been stung. "It's cold," she said. "And wet," Kale added, sounding almost accusatory. "That's right," Marcus agreed. "Cold and wet and moving. How does it feel?" "Uncomfortable," Zara said immediately. "Try keeping your feet in the water for a little longer," Marcus suggested. "Sometimes uncomfortable things become comfortable if you give them a chance." The children reluctantly returned their feet to the stream. Marcus watched their faces, looking for any sign of the dawning awareness that he was hoping to cultivate. For several minutes, they sat in silence, their expressions as blank as ever. Then, something shifted in Princess Zara's face. Not a smile, not even close, but the faintest suggestion of puzzlement. "The water feels different now," she said quietly. "Different how?" "Less cold. More." She struggled for words. "More acceptable." Marcus felt a surge of hope. "That's adaptation. Your body is getting used to the temperature. But there's something else happening too, isn't there? Something about the way the water moves around your feet." Kale was frowning at his submerged feet with an expression of intense concentration. "There's a sensation that is not temperature-related," he said finally. "The motion of the water creates pressure variations against the skin. Some people call that tickling," Marcus said. "Do you like it or not?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Finally, Zara spoke. "I am not certain. It is not unpleasant, but it is also not clearly beneficial." "Not everything has to be clearly beneficial," Marcus said. "Sometimes things are just nice." He reached down and cupped some water in his hands, letting it trickle through his fingers back into the stream. "See how the water catches the light when it falls? That's not beneficial either, but it's pretty to look at." The children watched the water fall from his hands with the intensity of scientists observing a new phenomenon. Slowly, tentatively, Zara cupped her own handful of water and lifted it out of the stream. "The individual droplets reflect the light differently," she observed as the water fell from her palms. "They do," Marcus agreed. "Each drop is like a tiny mirror." Kale tried the same experiment, holding his cupped hands up so the light streaming through the dome's transparent ceiling illuminated the falling water. "The effect varies depending on the angle of illumination," he said. For the next several minutes, the children experimented with water and light, discovering the optical properties of droplets and streams with the systematic thoroughness they applied to everything else. But gradually, Marcus noticed their approach was becoming less analytical and more playful. They began trying different ways of letting the water fall, creating patterns and cascades just to see what would happen. "This is fun," Marcus said quietly. The children paused in their experimentation. "This is fun?" Zara asked. "This is what fun feels like. Doing something because it's interesting, because you enjoy the sensation or the experience, not because you're trying to learn something specific or accomplish a goal." "But we are learning something," Kale protested. "We are observing the optical and tactile properties of moving water." "Sure, but that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because it's enjoyable, and the learning is just a side effect." The concept seemed to struggle to take root in their minds. Marcus could see them trying to process the idea that an activity could have value beyond its educational or practical applications. "On Earth," he continued, "children spend a lot of time doing things like this. Playing in water, building things with blocks, running around in circles for no reason except that it feels good. We call it play, and it's how children learn about the world and about themselves." "Our tutors have never mentioned play as part of education," Zara said. "Maybe that's because they forgot that education is supposed to include learning how to be happy." The silence that followed was different from their usual blank pauses. This felt like actual contemplation, as if the children were turning over concepts that had never occurred to them before. "Marcus," Princess Zara said finally, using his name for the first time since their conversation began. "Will you show us more things like this? More activities that serve no practical purpose but create pleasant sensations." The request was formal, carefully phrased, but it carried an undertone that Marcus recognized as the first genuine curiosity he had heard in her voice. "I'd be happy to," he said. "There are millions of things in the universe that exist just to be enjoyed. Games and stories and music and art and places to explore just because they're beautiful." "Million?" Kale asked, and Marcus could have sworn there was something like wonder in his voice. "Billions. Maybe trillions. Every species in the galaxy has discovered different ways to find joy in existence. And the best part is you never run out of new things to try." As they sat by the artificial stream in the palace's ecological dome, two alien children began to understand that the universe contained possibilities they had never been taught to consider. Their feet dangled in the moving water, their hands played with light and droplets, and somewhere deep in their carefully controlled minds, something that had been dormant for years began to stir. Marcus watched them discover the simple pleasure of pointless activity, and felt like he was witnessing the first sunrise on a world that had been dark for too long. They had a long way to go before they could truly be called children again, but for the first time in 4 years, Prince Kale and Princess Zara had asked to learn something just because it seemed like it might be fun. It was a beginning. 3 months after Marcus Chun first sat with the royal children beside an artificial stream, the Zephyrian Empire discovered something that would reshape its understanding of leadership, power, and the true strength that came from joy. It started with a giggle. Marcus was in the palace workshop, a space he had convinced the Empress to create by converting one of the many formal reception halls that saw little actual use. The room was now filled with workbenches, art supplies, building materials, and what most of the palace staff considered to be an alarming collection of seemingly useless objects that Marcus called toys. Prince Kale was attempting to construct what Marcus had described as a paper airplane, following instructions that seemed simple enough in theory, but proved remarkably challenging in practice. His first 17 attempts had resulted in objects that bore little resemblance to aircraft and no resemblance whatsoever to anything capable of flight. "I believe I have misunderstood the fundamental aerodynamic principles involved," Kale said, studying his latest creation with the same intensity he once reserved for hyperspace equations. "Don't think about aerodynamics," Marcus advised from where he was helping Princess Zara with her own project, a painting that had started as an attempt to recreate the view from her bedroom window, but had evolved into something far more abstract and colorful. "Just fold the paper the way I showed you, and see what happens when you throw it." "But if I do not understand the principles, Kale," Marcus interrupted gently. "Remember what we talked about? Sometimes you do things just to see what happens. The understanding comes later, if it comes at all." It was a lesson that had taken weeks to sink in. The children's minds had been trained to approach every activity as a problem to be solved, every experience as data to be analyzed and categorized. Teaching them that some things could be valuable without being useful had required patience that Marcus hadn't known he possessed. But gradually, incrementally, something had changed. It started with small things. Zara spending extra time in the garden dome, not to study the plants, but because she liked the way the light filtered through the leaves. Kale asking questions about Earth, not because the information was relevant to imperial policy, but because he was curious about how other children lived. Now, as Kale folded his 18th paper airplane with the careful precision that marked everything he did, something shifted in his approach. Instead of trying to create the perfect aircraft, he seemed to be simply following the motions and seeing what emerged. The airplane that resulted was lopsided, asymmetrical, and completely contrary to everything the palace engineers would have considered airworthy. When Kale released it, it flew in a wild, spiraling path that defied prediction and ended with a crash landing in Princess Zara's paint palette. And Prince Kale, heir to the Zephyrian throne and future ruler of 3,000 worlds, began to laugh. It started as a small sound, barely more than an exhale with a hint of vocalization. But As the absurdity of his airplane's flight path registered in his mind, as the pure silliness of the situation struck him, the sound grew. It became a chuckle, then a genuine laugh, then something that filled the workshop with a sound that hadn't been heard in the royal quarters for 4 years. Princess Zara looked up from her paint-spattered canvas, startled by the unfamiliar sound. For a moment, she watched her brother with the analytical attention that was their default mode, trying to classify and understand what she was witnessing. Then, she saw the paint-covered paper airplane that had landed in her palette, and the way the purple and gold pigments were now smeared across its makeshift wings. And she began to laugh too. Marcus stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe, watching 2 children discover something they had lost so long ago they had forgotten it ever existed. Their laughter was rusty, unpracticed, like muscles that had atrophied from disuse. But it was real. It was genuine. It was the sound of childhood finally, fighting its way back to the surface after years of burial under the weight of imperial responsibility. The sound carried through the workshop's open doors, echoing down the corridors of Level 25. Palace staff members stopped in their tracks, trying to identify the strange new sound emanating from the royal quarters. Security guards activated their communication devices, ready to report a potential emergency, before realizing that what they were hearing was not distress, but something far more unprecedented. In her private chambers 47 levels above, Empress Lyrelii heard the sound through the palace's monitoring systems and felt tears streaming down her face. She had almost forgotten what her children's laughter sounded like, had almost convinced herself that she might never hear it again. Dr. Kronos, reviewing medical data in his office, paused in his work as the sound reached him through the intercom system. In all his centuries of existence, he had never heard anything quite so miraculous as the laughter of children who had remembered how to be children. But in the workshop, Marcus was focused entirely on the present moment, on 2 children who had just discovered that the universe contained experiences that were purely, simply, wonderfully pointless. That was fun, Princess Zara said when her laughter finally subsided, and the way she said it carried a revelation, as if she had just decoded some fundamental secret about existence. Yes, Prince Kale agreed, looking at his crashed airplane with something that might have been affection. I understand now why humans create objects that serve no practical purpose. The pleasure is in the creation itself, and in the surprises, Zara added, gesturing toward her paint palette where purple and gold streaks created an accidental abstract pattern. I had planned to paint the garden dome, but this is more interesting. Marcus sat down on one of the workshop stools, feeling suddenly dizzy with relief and joy. That's what I've been trying to show you, he said quietly. The universe is full of surprises if you give it permission to surprise you. Over the following weeks, word of the children's transformation spread through the palace like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Tutors reported that while the children continued to excel in their studies, they now approached learning with curiosity rather than grim determination. They asked questions that went beyond the required curriculum, explored concepts that interested them personally, and had begun to demonstrate something that could only be called enthusiasm. The change went deeper than academic performance. The children had started to interact with the palace staff as individuals rather than as functional units. They learned the names of their tutors, asked about their lives and families, and showed interest in the experiences of beings from other worlds and cultures. Most remarkably, they had begun to play together. Marcus would find them in the workshop or the garden dome, creating elaborate games that combined their advanced knowledge with the simple joy of imagination. They built cities from art supplies and populated them with characters drawn from their studies of different species. They invented stories about their paper airplanes' journeys to distant worlds. They painted pictures that had no purpose beyond the pleasure of color and form. But perhaps the most significant change was in their relationship with their mother. Empress Lyrelii had become a regular visitor to Marcus's workshop sessions, not as the ruler of an empire observing her heir's education, but as a mother watching her children play. She sat on the floor with them, helped them with their projects, and gradually began to remember what it felt like to be a family rather than a dynasty. It was during one of these family sessions, as the three of them worked together to build an elaborate sculpture from recycled maintenance parts, that Princess Zara asked the question that would define the future of the Zephyrian Empire. "Mother," she said, carefully balancing a gear on top of their construction, "when Kale and I become Emperor and Empress, will we still be allowed to have fun?" The question struck Lyralii like a physical blow. In all her years of preparing her children for leadership, she had never considered that joy and responsibility might not be mutually exclusive. The Empire's greatest leaders throughout history had been admired for their wisdom, their strategic brilliance, their ability to make difficult decisions under pressure. None had been remembered for their capacity to find happiness in simple pleasures. "I think," she said carefully, "that leaders who remember how to find joy are probably better leaders than those who have forgotten." "Why?" Prince Kale asked, not challenging the statement, but genuinely curious about the reasoning behind it. Marcus looked up from the component he was examining. "Because people who remember how to be happy can understand what other people need to be happy. And if you're going to rule over billions of people, it helps.